Jill's remembers this. I don't know if this is what you were referring to, but I actually met him for the first time when I was getting my parking tag the first day that I came to work here. And we had a new parking system at the time, and he had to get a new sticker or something too, and we met just standing there in front of the security guard. And I felt the same exact way, just a generous, kind, compassionate person. So, although I don't know how kind and compassionate it was of him to put me on right after Scarlett, because that's a tough act to follow. The good news, though, is that at least a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is very supportive of what she said, and in some ways just they dovetail together so perfectly. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is how we lead with compassionate integrity. And frankly, I can now maybe add Scarlett's picture to this initial slide, because this is a woman who clearly leads with compassionate integrity. But today what we're going to talk about is what is compassionate integrity? What are the skills that go into leading with compassionate integrity? And then the question is, can these skills be trained? And as we go through the presentation, as you hear what I'm going to say, you'll see how for a long time the idea was that these things were not changeable. They could not be changed. But that's changing in our way of thinking. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so I want to begin by talking about two fundamental shifts that have occurred that all of this is based on. The first is the way we understand our very human nature. So this image is a great way of summarizing the way that people have viewed human beings for thousands of years now. The idea was that it's all about survival of the fittest. It's dog eat dog. Left to our own devices, we would be slaughtering each other, killing each other, trying to one-up the next guy, and we are all just really, at heart, selfish beings. And that really, what it took was religion or philosophy or law, something that had to enable us to have civilizations, enable us to control these people that were so barbaric at their core. And that all of these higher levels of thinking were just a thin veneer that covered up this baser human nature. Well, in the last 20 to 30 years, thanks to a lot of work in developmental psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and a number of different fields that have all kind of been doing this work independently but are now converging, we're recognizing that in actuality, this is much more the picture of human nature than the previous slide. That we are social beings, that we have compassion at the core, that we have kindness at the core. And why might that be? Well, first and foremost, as we saw in the last presentation very clearly, is that we need maternal care in order to survive. Every mammal and every bird must have maternal care in order to survive. If any mammal or bird species somehow decided we're not going to care for our young anymore, that species would be extinct in one generation. So because of that, we have to have the biological systems, the physiological systems, the neurological systems to be able to connect, to care, to look out for our offspring, as an offspring, to be able to seek those people that we can see are kind, compassionate, giving. And it's not just this thin veneer, it's actually the basis of our survival. Furthermore, we are social beings. It's not just about how we raise our offspring, but we have to live in, for thousands of years, we've lived in small groups. It's only more recently that we've lived in larger civilizations. And living in small groups, you rely on each other to survive. It's even more so today, but we think less of it. In a small group, you rely on each other for your very survival. And the example we give is, if you think about it in terms of an animal, right? If you're a gazelle out on the savannah and a pack of gazelles, right? You can be relatively safe because you move together, you protect each other, and there's strength in numbers. But the minute that you're a lone gazelle on the savannah, you're a dead gazelle. Right? Because by yourself, you will not survive the night. And that's why, frankly, again, we have the internal systems that make us seek out others, that make us afraid of social isolation, that make us want to bond with others. Again, as a very survival mechanism. So that's the first fundamental shift, is that over the last 20 or 30 years, instead of viewing human beings as primarily unethical, selfish, individualistic, all of the sciences are now beginning to turn and realize that human beings actually are dependent upon love and compassion at their very core. It's not that we don't have the other things, right? We do have those other things. And so that's what brings us to the second shift in thinking. And this is really important because, as we can tell, while we're putting forth this idea that we have this love and compassion at our core, at the same time we look around the world and recognize that things aren't so great in a lot of places. We have war, we have income inequality, we have poverty, we have environmental degradation, the list goes on. And that comes from the fact that we have a very limited and irrational sense of that compassion and that love. We're very prone to creating in-groups and out-groups, the us and the them, right? We want to, the same instinct that enables us, the same hormone even, oxytocin, that creates this bonding with other members of our family and other members of our in-group, heightens our animosity and our antipathy towards out-groups because we want to protect what we love and what we are bonded to. So we create these in-groups and out-groups. The second thing is it's highly illogical. When we see one child who's vulnerable and who's suffering, we feel a great amount of compassion. But if we see 10,000 people who are suffering, or we hear the fact that 20,000 children are dying every day from malnourishment, right? While that might touch us, it really just goes over our head. We get numbed by it. So we have a core of compassion and love, but it's irrational and it's limited. So how do we expand that? How do we train that? How do we go beyond that? So now I'm going to talk about this second fundamental shift, which is the fact, the discovery also over the last 20 or 30 years about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. The fact that our brains, which were thought to be static and if anything only losing brain cells over time, actually have the capacity to be restructured. We grow new brain cells, we can add functionality, and we can increase areas of the brain that have certain skills related to them, like compassion. In this one example here, this is a London cabbie, and in order to be a cab driver in London, you have to memorize the entire map of London. And so researchers who were on the idea of this whole idea of neuroplasticity decided to run a test. They took one group and they measured the size of their hippocampi, their part of the brain responsible for memory. They then took another group who were about to go through the process of learning about learning to become cabbies. At the end of their 3 or 4 year process, they looked at the group that was the control group. They looked at the group of cabbies that failed the test after 3 or 4 years of studying, and they looked at the ones that were successful. And as we now can assume, and it was proven out by this test, but we can guess, is that the control group had the smallest change in the size of their hippocampi. The ones that had failed the test had a little bit of growth, but not a lot. And the ones who were successful had the largest growth in that area of the brain responsible for the skill that they were trying to learn. And this has now been replicated. This is the study here, but it's been replicated many, many, many times and has now been replicated in other areas of research related, for example, to compassion research. So these are these two fundamental shifts that we're talking about. One, we have compassion, but it's a limited sense of compassion. But if we want to make the world a better place, if we want to be better leaders in our business, in our communities, in our schools, then we have to find ways to expand it. And neuroplasticity gives us that opening, that sense that if we practice something, we can make it stronger in us. And so that gets to this idea of leading with compassionate integrity. We've been doing research at Emory and here, my colleague and I, Brendan Ozawa da Silva, on compassion and the components of compassion. And over that time and adapting from other protocols have developed a program called Compassionate Integrity Training that has certain components that lead ultimately to being able to be more compassionate with similar ingredients as Scarlett was talking about. and practices that train those skills, where you can actually train in the particular skills that will then lead to the behaviors. So what do those look like? The first is integrity. Integrity is of utmost importance. The problem, though, with integrity is how we define it. If we simply define integrity as having a set of beliefs and acting in accordance with those beliefs and being congruent about that, then that's a very limited definition, because there are a lot of horrible people in the world who we can say lived out that kind of integrity. The question is, how do we define integrity which has compassion at the core? That's why we call it compassionate integrity, that recognizes that we are compassionate and kind at our core, and that's what we want to live in accordance with. And so that first piece requires several steps. The first step is cultivating a sense of ethical mindfulness. This is the ability to be aware of one's own speech and action, to have the basic minimum knowledge that we have the capacity to do harm, and that we don't want to do that harm, and so I've got to be mindful of my actions and my speech. The next piece is emotional awareness, because as was suggested earlier, it's really the thoughts that drive the speech and the action, and the thoughts related to emotions, etc., the internal voices that are what drive those thoughts and those behaviors. So the next step is, how do we become more aware of our emotions? How do we become more aware of our body in the way that they are connected to our emotions, and figure out how to discern between something that's an afflictive mental state or an afflictive emotion and one that's beneficial, right? Because we oftentimes, in the grips of anger, we feel justified, we feel righteous, we feel like we're doing the right thing. Only later do we regret it. But we have to learn how to figure that out as it's happening, right? So that we can then stop the thoughts that lead to the destructive behaviors. From that secure base develops a sense of forbearance, courage, and an inner fortitude to know that in a lot of ways we have control over our happiness and our suffering. We have the ability to control those mental processes. We have the ability to control our speech and actions, which means that we can confront the world in a new way. We can confront it with, in Tibetan, the word is sopa, which again has no direct translation, but it means courage, fortitude, forbearance, this ability to face the world and all that's in it with equanimity, with calm, and with a sense of what is right and what is wrong. From that secure base, that foundation, we then to begin the ability to be more pro-social. And that is talking about forgiveness, all the same ways that Scarlett was talking about, right? This is not forgetting, this is not condoning, this is about forgiveness. And as one of our fellows from our Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics, Richard Moore, says, is that holding back forgiveness and having resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get harmed or to die. You're only harming yourself. So that next level is forgiveness. Then from that base we can create a sense of contentment and generosity, recognizing, again, that we drive a lot of our own greed, jealousy, envy. Those things are things that come from the way we choose to see the world. And if we can become more content, we can be happier, we can also give more and be a better leader by giving more, being more generous, etc. The next thing, and this is critically important, we worked on this yesterday in our workshop, which is impartiality. So many of the problems in the world are derived from this sense of bias, right? What we need in our country is important. What they need is not important. What my race needs is important. We're going to identify that other race in negative terms. It's the us and them. It's the bias that we all carry. It's a very natural thing. It's part of our survival mechanism. But it causes us harm. It causes us individually harm, but it causes our communities and the world harm. And so how to, again, work on a particular practice and concepts that can help us drop the bias so that, again, we can become better human beings and better leaders. Next comes a sense of gratitude and endearment. So similar to that idea of contentment, contentment is kind of like getting you to that baseline, but how do we then start to figure out how to be grateful for everything that we have in the world. And there's two critical points here. One is, I was giving the example yesterday of, we walk around the world as if we're independent, as if we survive on our own. Maybe we're reliant on a few people just really right around us. But the facts are, everything is completely interdependent. That's the reality, right? We live in a kind of mental ignorance, right? Or a fog of ignorance around what is true. What's true is that everything I eat, everything I wear, everything I drive, this clicker, you people in the audience, everything is supporting me right now. And it wouldn't be possible without millions, probably actually billions of people that have gone into every piece of what enables me to survive and to thrive. But I choose not to see that. Now, when we take that to the level of really thinking about it deeply, who are the people that we care the most about? We really care the most about those people that we're grateful for, who do things for us, who help us. If we can expand the sense of gratitude to that point where I recognize that every one of you is right now supporting me, is here to help me, and I am benefiting from that. Everything I wear, people I don't even know, people who I may other and say they don't matter to me, they're actually supporting me too. I can be grateful to them, and then if I cultivate it, I can cultivate a sense of love, a sense of endearment for the fact that they sacrifice in some ways to support me. And so when we have somebody that we love and we see them suffering, what is the automatic response? The automatic response is compassion, because compassion is that desire to alleviate the suffering of someone we love or another. If I begin to see the whole world as people that I can love, the people who are supporting me that I can be grateful for, then I can begin to expand that compassion out to the whole world. And I can begin to live in a much different way. And then finally is this sense of discernment. And discernment is important for every step, because just like in that gratitude practice I was just talking about, you have to see over your own ignorance, right? You have to use your sense of reason to see reality. But discernment is also the way we go about making change. How do we act in a way that takes into account what is best for everybody? How do we figure out, am I acting out of compassion? Am I acting so in my organization? Am I doing what is all about me? Am I doing something that's just about my ego? Is it about me getting more wealthy? Or is it about the strength of the organization? Because I will say this, compassionate integrity is not weakness. Too often people think of compassion as soft, as it means you're just giving in all the time, that you're weak. But if anything, compassion is fierce. Compassion is strong. As the Buddhist saying states, in order to have compassion, you have to have a strong back and a soft front. Because maybe the best thing for the organization would be, unfortunately, to have to lay some people off in a situation, because the strength of the organization demands it. But at the same time, there's a compassionate way to go about that, and there's a way to do it that shows no compassion. So discernment is that final step to really check who you are, what's driving you, and how to make the best solution that's best for everybody. I just wanted to end by just talking about a few of the different things that we're doing with this. As was mentioned, through the center, we're taking this concept, and it's really been these values, these practices, this ideology is really kind of built into a lot of what we're doing at the university. And we have a master's program in contemplative science and secular ethics. We've now launched a degree program in positive human development and social change, which is the degree that we are going to be launching this summer at Lee Arundel Women's Prison in about an hour north of here, to be the first degree granting program in Georgia. But we're also on the other side working with leaders of business. So for those who have heard of Etsy.com, which is a very large marketplace, online marketplace, it's like the Amazon for handmade goods. Their founder chose to, before they went public, to push some stock into a nonprofit called Etsy.org. And Etsy.org is an organization who is training entrepreneurs to use their business to regenerate themselves, their employees, and their communities. And they ran a cohort back, I guess ended just back in January, their first cohort of 20 businesses. And now that we've been talking to them, they are going to be embedding compassionate integrity training into their whole next curriculum, which is going to launch in June. And then we're also working with the National Center for Civil and Human Rights on a joint program with them, because they want to incorporate this into the work that they're doing in trying to develop diversity programs for corporations, ethics programs for corporations, as well as universities. So the idea is to take these ideas, these training programs, and to have them permeate all parts of society. So again, we can create a more compassionate society and create more compassionate leaders, and we can create a better world. So thank you very much.